just to give a quick overview, because this is a pretty famous story about how this story came to be. So in the summer of 1816, you had the daughter of feminism, basically. Mary Wollstonecraft wrote this book called On the Vindication of Women that was like the birth of feminism, essentially. I mean, to boil it down, really, basically. So she died shortly after childbirth, giving birth to her daughter, Mary Wollstonecraft, who would later become Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, when she met the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, and they eloped, and they ran away from home with Lord Byron, who was also a poet, and Mary's stepsister Clara Claremont. And at the time, it was weird. Like, it's hard to contextualize now. It's like they were rock stars of their day, Byron and Shelley, or rap stars of now, maybe, because they're poets or something.
Yeah,
but
that's fair.
they were like, they called Byron mad, bad, and dangerous to know, and they were just like the coolest things around, and writing really exciting work, and they're now known as the Romantics and stuff. And it was a big free love, like everybody was fucking in that little menagerie, and including I think Byron and Shelley. And
awesome.
But yeah, they went off to this. It was like the coldest summer on record, and at some point, and there's all these fucking geniuses, and essentially like literary geniuses, and they were, having these long talks about, intellectual things and smoking, or no, it wasn't smoking. What was it? There's like a lot of laudanum. Like Shelley had a drug problem of some kind. Anyway, but
absinthe.
And there was some absinthe going on. Yeah, they're definitely, and like Mary's stepsister Clara Claremont was like wanting to try to. I think she was pregnant with Byron's child, maybe like trying to kind of have a kid with him, but he wasn't really having it, and he had his quote-unquote physician along in this summer retreat, Polidori. And so there's this one night where Byron suggested we should all write a ghost story. It's this very cold, wet summer. They couldn't really go outside. And out of that suggestion came, Polidori wrote this poem or short story-ish thing that kind of became... It was a little bit, there's like this vampiric thing kind of based on the manner of Lord Byron that people sort of say gave birth to what Bram Stoker would ultimately flesh out as the aristocratic vampire in Dracula. And then Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. And as she tells it in the introduction to the 1831 book, she couldn't think of a story. And at one point she was like kind of in this half waking state. And she saw this like vision in her mind's eye of a young science student hunkered over the body of a man he'd stitched together, and on the workings of some machine, the man like came to life. Because they were having like these intellectual discussions about science.
Yeah.
It was like, I don't know, I've heard it described as like one of the last times in history that really learned people could know almost everything about there was available to be known.
Yeah.
And new discoveries were being made and stuff. But yeah, so essentially this like 16, 17-year-old girl writes this story that's now 200 years old in the public this year, the 1818. It was published, I think, on January 1st, anonymously in 1818. Of course, people thought it was a man. Eventually, people thought it was Percy Shelley. And that one book that I hold up, like there's this kind of argument that Percy Shelley wrote a lot of it, but that book helps distinguish like his notes from her handwriting and the things that he added. But essentially, most of it sprang from the imagination of this young girl. And it's argued sometimes that it's not a great book, but it's a great idea. It is certainly far and away my favorite book, and a book I've been obsessed with since I was 8 or 9 years old. And so I thought that was a fun time because there's a lot of things happening around the 200th anniversary that if you're kind of curious, you can get involved in. If you have not read the book, it's available. Like, I think NPR did a Science Friday thing. I'll tweet it out, where there was a kind of a scientifically annotated PDF free version that anyone could get. Of course, listeners to our show could go to
audibletrial.com/LWSD and download their free audio, sign up for their free Audible trial and download a free audiobook version of Frankenstein.
Yes, sir. And there are numerous versions thereof. I'm not sure if Audible has it, but one of my favorites is it's abridged, so that kind of sucks. But it's like 3 hours. It's pretty well abridged. Like there's not a lot I miss. I recall, but Kenneth Branagh read it in 1994.
Who is arguably one of the best portrayals of Dr. Frankenstein, right? In that,
for me, yeah, that's not a very well liked movie, but I love it
because it's like,
yeah.
He plays Dr. Frankenstein, and then
Robert De Niro.
Robert De Niro, yes,
yeah, plays the creature.
Plays the creature, the monster.
Yeah, that's one of the closest versions to the novel that has been produced. So, I mean, the most famous rendition, came out in 1930. I'm not even that drunk. I'm just trying to talk fast.
Yeah.
But yeah, in 1931, one of the very first talkie horror film. The very first talkie horror film was Dracula with Bela Lugosi, and the same year, later that year, was Frankenstein, starring then largely unknown Boris Karloff, who had been in 100 movies, but was not, famous, I guess, for his acting career. But he did this indelible performance under the Jack Pierce makeup and under the direction of James Whale in this incredible movie. That now most listeners of our show will know Frankenstein, the kind of cultural, the square-headed monster, all of this. But if you are a fan of science fiction, which I know a lot of our key listeners are, and in particular, if you're also into the philosophical bent of that, and have not actually engaged with the book, I would encourage you to do so. It's I think it's pretty rewarding, and there's one of my favorite things about it is the language. The very first movie I ever, the very first dramatic thing that I ever did in live action, the first attempt at anything was a Karate Kid action figure drama in 1987. But by 1988, I had seen the 1931 film and convinced my dad to point the camera at me as I reenacted it with Moto, running around our backyard and our home, doing our best to recreate that 1931 film. But I've been obsessed with it ever since then. And in the early 2000s, I started to really think seriously about trying to adapt it like Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, or the Hamlet update with Ethan Hawke. I love so much the language and the structure and the book itself. There's these incredible passages. The creature speaks perfect and eloquent English, not like the mute Karloff monster. So
sure.
At a certain point, when he confronts his creator, he demands that he make for him a mate, that is equally deformed as him, so that he won't be alone. And he's like, but if you refuse, we'll glut the maw of death till it be satiated by the blood of your few remaining friends. And it's this fucking great, visceral, romantic language that has never really been captured. So I had this idea that I could set the movie a modern retelling around when the first sheep was cloned in the mid-90s. And try to keep it so that every word that was spoken would be from the book, and there was a lot of communication in letters I thought could be early emails. Anyway, whatever. I've always loved this story, and in this 200th anniversary, there's a bunch of ways in which I can engage with it. You heard a few of them in that video. I thought maybe I'll just give a quick rundown of things that not just me, but other people could go out and see if they're interested. And
sure.
Then time permitting, we can talk some Castle Rock, but this weekend, actually, I don't know if you can do this elsewhere, but we got an Alamo Draft House in the Twin Cities.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. And there's actually, they've been showing Mandy, but they'll show it Mandy at 1:30 on a Monday. I'm like, fuck, I can't.
What the fuck?
Yeah. So they're showing a bunch of cool stuff, but a lot of them, it's not particularly convenient for me. But on this Sunday, they're showing a double feature of Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein, 1931 and 35. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Actually, that's based on a goose. That actress saw a goose do that when
that
he
makes
threatened
sense.
that.
Yeah, fuck geese.
She put it in the movie. Fuck geese. Yeah.
Rats with wings.
Rats with wings. Yeah. Anyway, those two films, a lot of film critics argue that The Bride of Frankenstein is even better film than the first, which I think I would agree, but my favorite is the first. So, but even together,
And there's actually
like,
a trilogy too, which is like the son of Frankenstein, right? Like,
yeah, they kind of keep going. Like that's for me that I realized that was where a real love of that kind of continuity was born, and because the like comics and stuff like that. My first encounter with that were these Frankenstein and Wolfman pictures. Like they would keep the story going, and anyway, but. So those two play together, as I mentioned, like the monster demanding a mate is actually part of the original story. So it works pretty well. They're both spectacular films. I have seen them both on the big screen twice, but I'm trying to talk the bride into going to this new Alamo Draft House this weekend to see them together. I saw them at the Highland Theater, like film prints
nice.
in the 90s. And then they did a Fathom Events type thing that I went to a few years ago. But so I'm hoping to go to that. I'm not sure that will happen. One thing that I do want everyone to know about, we talked about it briefly, and I was hoping this would work out, but Fathom Events is putting into theaters the National Theatre Live British stage play of Frankenstein, directed by Danny Boyle, and co-starring Johnny Lee Miller and Benedict Cumberbatch in the title roles. So like as Doctor and in the Frankenstein monster, and they swap. So on October 22nd, and I looked, there's some even near Dayton, so I definitely recommend you go if you feel like it. To one or both of these. I'm going to go to both. I've been to one before, and now I'm going to go to both. It's October 22nd is the Cumberbatch as the monster.
Okay.
Benedict Cumberbatch as the monster and Johnny Lee Miller as Frankenstein. And then on October 29th, it will be Johnny Lee Miller as the monster and Benedict Cumberbatch as Frankenstein. So if you go to fathomevents.com and search Frankenstein, you can see if it's playing anywhere near you. But I have seen this before. They refuse. And Danny Boyle, we've talked about on the show. We like him quite a bit. Academy Award winning director Danny Boyle does this theatrical presentation of the novel that is relatively faithful and really explores the duality of that, creator created thing to great effect. I think I've seen the Benedict Cumberbatch as the monster.
And for those of you who don't, because I didn't know, I had to look him up. Johnny Lee Miller, I think probably the most recent thing that you might know him from, he plays Sherlock Holmes in the American show Elementary with Lucy Liu.
Oh, sure, yeah. And it's funny because Benedict Cumberbatch, of course, is Sherlock in the BBC series.
In the BBC Sherlock, which that's like and both of them are modern tellings of Sherlock, right?
Yeah,
of Sherlock Holmes, right?
Absolutely. The BBC is a little bit more. I mean, they have email and stuff, but it has a slightly more traditional feel.
Gotcha.
That's spectacular. If ever you get around to that, each of those is literally is like a 90-minute movie. I had no love for that story or characters prior to that series.
Yeah,
but after I really do appreciate that. Right. And I love this this stage play. So it's very cool. And
I am
refuse
interested in seeing that because I do like both of them as actors, and I like that. I'm more intrigued by the watching them switch roles. So if I were to do it, I would want to see both of them, so I could see them switch roles. That would be very interesting to me. There was for one semester, I was a performing arts major at the University of Akron, and they did a production of The Importance of Being Earnest, and there was two characters. They weren't main characters, but there were two characters that they alternated the actors playing those characters throughout the entire production. And like one guy was a big guy, like he was big like me, big, and the other guy was small. And so they had to make two costumes. It's not like they even just traded the costumes. Like they had to make two of each costume. So then they could alternate, and it was fantastic. Really.
Oh, wow.
It's a great dynamic for a stage production to just swap up the actors depending on what night you're putting the play on. So that really intrigues me.
Yeah, I've never seen both. But the one I saw of Cumberbatch was great, and so I'm gonna do that too. Both are Monday nights. They have this thing where they don't want the people involved creatively in that project. They don't want it to be like a thing you can see on home video. It will only be in theaters, they say.
Oh wow!
So I've been waiting to for another opportunity to see it, and when 200th anniversary, I was like, oh, well, I hope it'll come around, and it is. So, and there's great stuff on iTunes, like great sort of supplementary podcasts and video casts about the theatrical production you can look into.
Wow.
Jacko actually got me the printed, because he was living in England at the time when it premiered. He got me like a book of it, and I remember being really impressed by that adaptation. He got it for me a year or so after. In 2003, I was in an English class where I learned that they were doing in this community college, they were doing a production of Frankenstein as a play. And I was like, I gotta be involved in this, but it was too late really for me to get involved.
Yeah.
And I got like crazed and seized upon the opportunity and essentially like created something that was probably 4 times too long, but like a distillation black box theater version of the book that I was like, you guys, here you go. I know you probably got a script, but and they were like, okay, thanks. We can't do anything else. They didn't say that, but ultimately somehow, and I haven't even had the courage to read that since. I'm sure it's terrible. But in any event, Jacko ended up doing the makeup. He was living in Pittsburgh at the time.
Yeah.
And he did a Bernie Wrightson kind of inspired makeup, physical appliance for this terrible theatrical production in Raleigh, North Carolina. And like I drove out to Pittsburgh with these guys, and Jacko made this mold of a guy that was not. He was a sizable monster. He was not like a gaunt figure. He was a pretty sort of heavy set dude. Anyway, that was all a very fun experience. But so I've had some interest in like a theatrical interpretation, any interpretation of that work, because I'm so familiar with it, and have myself made 2 versions of it in 1988 on home video.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
Dreamed of a big screen, postmodern adapt. Like I have this like this pretentious, ridiculous title. The subtitle of the book, it's Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. That's what it's called, like Frankenstein semicolon or the Modern Prometheus, which is like Prometheus was the Greek. Was he a Greek god or something?
No,
a Titan that
stole fire from the gods.
Yeah, stole fire from the gods, and so I wanted to call it Frankenstein postmodern Prometheus. It's so stupid. Anyway, I haven't done that, but I enjoy the whole thing, and I'm looking forward to all these ways in which I can experience it. Just quickly, there's very coolly for me, no one else unless you live in the Minneapolis area. Can go to the University of Minnesota where they're hosting a series of Frankenstein at 200 themed talks. I've got to go to one of them so far.
Awesome.
And you'll be so shocked and awed that I didn't bore people with my bullshit there. I wanted to until the first person opened their mouth, and I was like, whoop, I'm not going to be one of these people because I can't stand them. I just appreciated being able to think about Frankenstein in a room full of people also experiencing it. But I was like, you're a dick, you're a dick. I'm a dick, but I'm not going to let you guys know that I'm a dick.
You're talking about, but I'm a dick.
I mean, it was fine. They did. The one thing was like they showed a clip from the 31 movie, and the guy was trying to remember, like, oh, what's the name of this actor, Edward? I'm like, Van Sloan. He's like, thank you. I was like... Anyway, but I'm going to one more of those. There's a few different ones, but for some reason they don't all interest me. But on the 23rd, if you live in this area in the Twin Cities, you can go and see monster readings where Twin Cities professional actors exhume Mary Shelley's hideous phantasm of a man, and they're going to be like reading passages from the book, actors. So I'm hoping that maybe they'll do the glut the maw of death thing that I like so much. And then finally, the last thing, I got tickets to, there's a famous, regionally famous, or I don't know, theater here, Guthrie Theater. They have a new play adapted by Barbara Field, directed by Rob Melrose, called Frankenstein, Playing with Fire. And it's a slightly kind of different spin where it's like it has Frankenstein dying in the Arctic and meeting his monster and then trying to right their greatest wrongs, as they say. So I think Frankenstein does play with time a bit, and it does have an Arctic framing device, like of someone trying to discover the North Pole. But I'm guessing this this in the book, like the two of them meet about midway through, and then the creature tells his creator like what happened to him since he was abandoned after his creation. Anyway, I think this one puts it at the end of the creator's life in the Arctic, and that's where they kind of I don't know. It's a little bit of a different spin, but we got front row center on October, I want to say 29th, toward the end of that run.
Awesome.
And that will be kind of round out the month for me of spending with Frankenstein. So there it is.
There's
Frankenstein at 200.
There's a found footage movie. It's really low budget, not very good. That the main character essentially is a descendant from Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, and proves has a hypothesis that the book Frankenstein is actually accurate. It's true. And that the monster is still alive in the North Pole. And so he takes an expedition up into Alaska and finds it's a found footage movie. So it's like,
oh, cool.
But they find the monster and he kills everybody basically. Hunts them.
Oh, wow.
And,
I'm in.
Yeah. It's very low production quality. And I mean, it's good. The production quality looks like Blair Witch without being as appealing at all. Like it's not as appealing at all. But if I find the title for it, I will, I'll text it to you because it was on Netflix when I watched it, but it was very intriguing just from the perspective of liking Frankenstein, which I don't like Frankenstein anywhere near, Frankenstein's like Your Dark Tower, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So, just from the perspective, but I still like the story. I have to say, if you find Young Frankenstein playing anywhere, I was lucky enough to find.
Yeah. That's at Alamo.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to find a few years ago. Oh, longer than that now. There was a theater that did a talk along showing of Young Frankenstein, where you were encouraged to say lines along with the movie or shout jokes out along with the movie, like in like a mystery science theater type style. It wasn't a film print. It was a Blu-ray that they played, but that was super fun. Everybody made the horse noises when they said Faubelucha. And
it's like, I remember what my old man would say in times like these. What the hell are you doing in the bathroom day and night? Why don't you get out there and give someone else a chance?
I have a hump. Oh,
what
man.
hump?
I love that movie.
That movie is pure joy, and it's one of those bizarre like spoofs of a movie that is also really highly regarded amongst like aficionados of the source material. Like people, I don't know, that's a highly revered. Oh, the Moto chime in here. Werewolf, like werewolf. What? Their wolf, their castle. Why are you talking like that? I thought you wanted to. No, I don't want to. Suit yourself. I'm easy. I could maybe do that in order. I want to tag up just real quick on the It's Alive thing because I went on quite a bit about my Frankenstein plans. I'll just give a quick here's what was cool. So I went to see both versions of the National Theater Company live streaming of Danny Boyle's theatrical production of Frankenstein written by Nick Dear.
Yeah.
The creative team there, they're committed to it not being on home video and only being in theaters, so it'll be like a Fathom event type thing that only happens every so often, and because of the 200th anniversary, they put it out again to the point where in the credits it said copyright 2018, like there were new credits.
Shit.
Kind of cool. But that's the production where Johnny Lee Miller, who we'd all know from Trainspotting or what's the American Sherlock? Elementary.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that, but I know and then Benedict Cumberbatch who's on the British Sherlock. They alternate roles as the creature and Victor. Well, theatrically, they would alternate them on the nights, and then in these broadcasts, or whatever they call them, they put them in theaters, recorded versions of the plays. They show each. I'd only ever seen one in 2011 or whenever that was that they put them out. I saw Johnny Lee Miller as the creature and Benedict Cumberbatch as Victor. And I loved it. I loved the adaptation. But I saw both. They only played them once. So it was like, thankfully it was kind of worked out to where the bride teaches on Monday nights, and these were on Monday nights. So I didn't have to torture her with them. So last Monday night, I went to the one that I'd seen, the Johnny Lee Miller as the creature, and two Monday nights ago, I saw the one with Benedict Cumberbatch as the creature and Johnny Lee Miller as Victor, which I actually vastly preferred.
Wow!
I didn't know if I would have a preference, but I really did. I think what it wasn't so much that I preferred Benedict Cumberbatch's creature, but I preferred Johnny Lee Miller's Victor. I really just dug it. So I don't know. You have to see that in theaters. They do a nice job. There's like podcasts and interviews and stuff on iTunes and YouTube. They get this kind of supplementary material that I appreciate. You can download like an extensive PDF program. And then the theatrical thing had like a, I don't know, 5 to 7 minute making of type deal as well from the time when it was created. And I really enjoyed that, but I ended up really preferring the one that I hadn't seen. I saw a live theatrical production called Playing with Fire last Friday, just like less than a week ago, at the Guthrie Theater in Minnesota. And actually, I'm wearing a T-shirt that maybe you can kind of see.
Oh man,
I really love this design. Like so basically, YouTube viewers can see it, but it has the creature, and then kind of in between his legs, like well, it sounds terrible. They have this clever design where Victor is kind of works as a shadow inside the creature, and it plays a lot. I mean, one of the major themes of the book that's exploited in that Denny Boyle play is that kind of doppelganger thing about them being reflections of each other and whatnot. So this play, I didn't look up anything about it yet, but I've downloaded a bunch of stuff. It's a cool thing about theater. Like you get these like behind the scenes books, basically. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll tell you a little bit more why I appreciate that in another context. But so this one, what I didn't know, I thought it was a new play at this Guthrie Theater in Minnesota. And it turns out it was not a new play. It was a revival performance of a play from 30 years ago that was commissioned specifically for this theater that ultimately went on tour across the U.S.
Wow.
So it's called Frankenstein Playing with Fire, and it's by Barbara Field. And again, all this is for the 200th anniversary of Frankenstein, but it's been playing since mid-September. It's over now. We saw it the night before it closed. But we were right down front, and what's fun, I mean, we've talked a lot about this on the show and stuff too. I really enjoy and appreciate very in-depth knowledge of stuff. And as people who are listening chronologically, I talked a lot about The Crow last episode, and I could do an entire podcast 58 episodes long about just The Crow. Like I love like deep dives into shit. And so Frankenstein is one of those things. So I really appreciate these adaptations, and since I'm so familiar with it, seeing how it's translated, what people seize upon. And this play was kind of interesting in that it wasn't a direct adaptation of the events of the novel, but it kind of tweaks the end of the creature's and Victor's time together, and that instead of being in the Arctic on the ship with Walton, they're just like at the top of the world on the summer solstice on the longest day, and Victor's been tracking the creature for years and years, like to where they're kind of old, and they do these like flashbacks and relive certain parts of their interactions together that you would know from the book as flashbacks with different actors, but they're all present. It was pretty clever. It opens with the line of Victor shouting at the creature, "Do you dream?" And then kind of goes from there. But It was it had a slightly odd tone to it, where it was kind of comedic in ways I wasn't prepared for. But ultimately, I really enjoyed it. I fucking love the design. I got the T-shirt and the poster.
That T-shirt is amazing.
It's really I don't know who did this design, but it's really pretty cool.
Because I like how you can see the stitches and
yeah, and just the way that they're able to incorporate both of their frames in the same, and they play off that a lot. Like they're essentially wearing the same coat, which is it's nice. It's cleverly done, and I didn't realize that play had originated at this theater 30 years ago. So that's kind of fun because I think it's in a documentary that I know fondly about Frankenstein. But that I did drag the bride to, and I think she was kind of okay with it. But she doesn't, it makes her crazy. I mean, a big part of this book. I mean, even though the book was written by literally like the daughter of feminism. I mean, Mary Wollstonecraft wrote on the vindication of the rights of women, and then she died shortly after giving birth to Mary, who ultimately became Mary Shelley, but who wrote Frankenstein. There aren't strong female characters in that book. It comes from a very strong female author, the daughter of two intellectual luminaries of the 19th century, but anyway, but you don't see that. Like, it's basically kind of written about the men in her life. William Godwin and her dad, her kind of aloof father, Shelley, her poet husband who died shortly after. They had many children die. Anyway, even though it comes from this place, it's a very much about like the folly of man and the hubris of man and all of that. So that makes the bride crazy. But I love it. She was asking me on the way home, like, why I loved it. And I couldn't really come up with an answer. I was like frustrated. But then I just kept it. It was like High Fidelity, where he keeps revising his top 5. I just kept answering her for days and days.
Yeah.
The thing about that book is like it's full of so many ideas, and I won't get into them here. But anyway, so that was awesome. I saw those two. And then there was a couple events on the university campus where I work that I was able to stay after and see, one of which was like, okay. But then the second one was an actor's reading, or there were people reading dramatically the text of not just Frankenstein, but some Dracula too. I read on our episode where I talk about Frankenstein, I think it's 56, one of my favorite quotes about, if you refuse my request, I will glut the maw of death until it be satiated by your few remaining friends. I fucking love that line. And one of the things I really appreciated about Frankenstein playing with fire, both that and the Danny Boyle one are very faithful to the text of the novel in various ways. Nick Deere wrote the Danny Boyle directed version. But yeah, I was really pleased how much of the novel's language is in there, because in most of cinematic history, like even the one with Robert De Niro, the creature doesn't have the kind of loquacious, like sensuous language that he develops in the book. So that was fun for me. And so the last thing I'll say about it is I saw this. My favorite thing about the event where people read from the book was a 14-year-old kid who seemed even younger. Like, I thought he was going to read something, play like William, the Victor's kid brother who gets killed by the creature, is the first victim of the creature. But he read, the kid that did this amazing reading from the book that went on for quite a while. Like, I was like, I told him afterward, I ended up turning out, I was sitting next to his father, and I was like, is that your son? Because, after, and there was an intermission, and the kid came up and talked to the guy. And as a performer myself, like, I understand all you can think about is like what you're not getting right, or like, you're a bundle of nerves and a horrible burden to your loved ones on performance days. And but when he walked away, I was like, is that your kid? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, well, I told him, like, I will never forget that. Like, he was so inspired.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was so fun. And then ultimately, I didn't know if I could say it to the kid. Like, I didn't want to freak him out. And, but at a certain point in gushing to his father, he said, he's like, oh yeah, you could tell him. I didn't ask him if I could tell him. He's like, he kind of intimated he would like to hear it from you. I was like, oh fuck yeah, I'll tell him.
Yeah.
So I hung around after and told the kid, and I was like, it was the day after I saw the Cumberbatch creature and Johnny Lee Miller Victor. And I told him, it's like,
fuck.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Me too.
Is the day after you saw the Cumberbatch creature?
Yeah. Did it come back, or should I kill my?
Yeah, no, you're back. You're back.
So I told him, I was like, do you know who these two actors are? And he's like, yeah. So hopefully between him and his dad, somebody did know. But I was like, last night I watched them do this performance essentially, and they swap roles. And I was like, you kind of did that as a 14-year-old. You assumed at certain points the voice of the creature as you're reading the novel and stuff. And I was like, I was equally riveted by your performance. And he seemed to really appreciate that, which was nice.
Awesome.
And so did I. So I've had a really lovely month indulging in my Frankenstein obsession in honor of its 200th anniversary. And that's what I can report.